All systems go. Clear for liftoff.
Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy GS Luke here with our round 2 live stream for this week's American Express. Going to get you guys ready for all your showdown lineups tomorrow. But first off, we'll look at the weather. We'll look through some of the stats out there from round 1. Those will be only from the stadium course, but hey, we'll look through the third of the field that we can. We'll talk some lineup construction, how to actually go out there and build for those GPPs, and a few of the different plays that I'll be playing out there for tomorrow. But first off, hopefully you're having a fantastic Thursday. You're ready to talk some golf out there for round 2's action. So throw any questions that you have down there in the chat. And if you don't have any, you just want to say hi, that's totally fine as well. The first thing I need you to do is go ahead and smash that like button if you haven't already. And also subscribe to the SHIPIT Nation YouTube channel so you don't miss any of this content to come. I also want to remind you guys how to get access to all the tools that you're going to see here. They are going to be from the SHIPIT Nation. So the stone that we talk about later, that can be found over there with the SHIPIT Nation stone. And they also have all their projections, DGen scorecard, which is brand new here in 2025. And that can all be accessed via their website, a link in the description of the live stream, and using code Luke10 will give you a discount off any membership. So make sure to sign up if you guys haven't already, and let's go ahead and get this thing rocking out here for Friday's action, which I think this could be one of the bigger edges that we've had for Showdown for quite some time, mostly because of the way that people were playing in round 1 Showdown. So this is a golf course, or a golf tournament, I should say, where you have 3 different courses in play, and what you saw out there for round number 1 was the stadium course play significantly more difficult. In fact, it played a whole 0.23 strokes over par. The Nicklaus tournament course was the easiest out of the 3 at nearly a whole 4 strokes under par. And closely behind was the La Quinta Country Club. And that only played about 3.71 strokes under par. Last year, La Quinta was the easiest out of the 3 golf courses. But what you'll know is that the stadium course underwent some renovations. We all thought it would play harder with the firmer greens out there this year. And then La Quinta had a lot of different trees moved around since last year. So I theorized on my live stream yesterday that it might play a little bit harder this year as well. So the Nicklaus tournament course, I think you're going to see play the easiest going forward, but you're going to get some variance when it comes to each field. These different subsets of players, right, they're all going to be together for the first 3 rounds, right? The guys that are playing on the stadium course today are going to be alongside the same players for the next 2-3 days. You're going to see some variance when it comes to these scoring averages. So what I noticed out there for round 1 were that a lot of the guys playing on the Nicklaus course weren't your best players in the field. In fact, if you take a look at the main slate sheet of the guys that were 9K plus, none of them were playing the Nicklaus course other than Cam Young. So it was really slim pickings up there towards the top end of the board. A JT Poston was there in the 8K range from the Nicklaus course. You had a Sepp Straka on the Nicklaus course as well, but he was a little bit further down the board. Your Cantlays, your Finaus, all of those sort of players were over here on La Quinta. So I would argue that the best out of the 3 different pods, I'm going to call each of these different courses a pod when I'm talking about each subset of players. I would argue that this La Quinta pod was the best out of the 3, and yet it still played about 0.15 strokes harder than what you had over here at Nicklaus. So in terms of my exposure over here for round 2 Showdown, I think it's pretty straightforward with what you guys should do. You need to be eliminating all the stadium guys from contention. There's just no reason to play guys at a golf course that played over par. And then when you're choosing between the Nicklaus course and La Quinta, I would put the edge over there towards Nicklaus. So I'm going to run the birdie averages after I do this live stream to get a good idea for the prop side of things. But when I run them, I'm expecting there to see slightly more birdies over there on Nicklaus, which in that kind of case is going to put me on those players just a little bit more over there for my showdown tomorrow. The other thing I want to look at here was the effect of the weather today. And if we go over here to La Quinta, you'll see that the later players played to a slightly easier scoring average. Now, it was only about a 0.16 shot difference, so just under a 0.2 shot difference between the first and second half of players. But if you go over here to the stadium course, the difference is much more pronounced. In the morning, it played to a 0.83 over par scoring average, whereas the second half, and can't really say morning versus afternoon. It's the first versus the second half of tee times. So there's not even that much leeway that we have out there. But if you do that, it's a stroke difference between morning and afternoon. Now, I would be, misleading you if I didn't show you this Nicklaus course. The Nicklaus course actually played a little bit harder as the day went on, but with the 40 to 50 degree temperatures that they had for the first few hours, you can see over here at 8 a.m. local time, they started at 8:30 local. It was only about 60 degrees. It stayed about that temperature until about 10 a.m. local time. That had a slight effect, especially over there at the stadium course. So I think if you're going to play a weather edge, you might want to take some of the later starters as well. Of course, over there on either La Quinta or preferably, in my opinion, over there on the Nicklaus tournament course. And just to show you some of this weather for Friday's action, I'm going to bring up all 5 models over here in La Quinta. You can see that in the morning, it's going to be a little bit chilly again. Also, perhaps a little bit breezy, at least on this GFS model. It's showing that. If you go down to the bottom model, this HRRR model, it's also one of the ones that I tend to trust a little bit more. It's cool in the morning, and the breezes right around starting time are higher than what you have there in midday. So this edge that we saw in the 2 out of the 3 courses in round number 1, I think could be out there for round number 2. And round 2 is going to be the real litmus test. I mean, just a one round sample size can have a lot of variance involved with it. But when we see that for the first 2 days, so when we get there to round 3 showdown, we're going to have a lot of really valuable data to go off of. And just to give you guys some of the background here, in case you're new to the AMEX and how it works with this 3-course setup, they don't change the pins from day to day. So the setup out there for round number 1 is going to be identical for rounds 2 and 3. So, we already have a pretty good idea of how the golf course is playing. But after we get those averages from tomorrow, we're going to have a really good idea of how these golf courses are playing. But in terms of the weather, I think it's perhaps just going after some of the later starters, which is kind of backwards to what we normally say out here on tour. A lot of times the early guys are getting more receptive conditions, oftentimes also slightly calmer wind conditions. But this time around, the temperature is more so the deciding factor, and also the fact that those early breezes up here on the GFS could be a little bit troublesome for the first few groups out. So if we're taking a look at the tee times for round number 2, those were decided well ahead of time. If you're going to try and find some of the later starters, maybe you go to the guys that are starting in like the second half of tee times, or maybe even preferably even later out there into the tee times, and try and find some guys that are on the Nicklaus course. So, we're not going to go through all of them here together. That's why you guys have your own process over there with the stone that we're going to use for some research here in a second. But looking at some of these later starters on the Nicklaus course, like you got a Spawn coming in with some form. Enrico Hoey, who makes a ton of birdies out there. Ben Silverman's a guy that I would be keeping an eye on. Wyndham Clark is one of the few studs playing on the Nicklaus course a little bit later on. This is the kind of research that you should be doing for your round 2 showdown lineup. So it's not all stat-based. Part of it is making sure that we're targeting the right tee times. And tomorrow, you want guys playing on those 2 easy golf courses. And then I think if you're breaking ties, you don't have to only play guys that are going off late. But if you've got an early guy versus a later starter tomorrow, give me that later starter all day. So hopefully that clarifies the weather discussion, what I'm doing out there with my lineups. And I think it's going to have a pretty substantial effect on my process. I mean, and I don't even think I know it's going to have a really big effect on my process, because I'm already eliminating a third of the field going out there and not taking stadium guys. And then if I'm going to be preferring some of the later starters, that's taking that 2/3 and kind of helping me whittle it down out there to a player pool. So I can still take guys from La Quinta and the Nicklaus course and just maybe take some of the later starters out there from either golf course. So that's how I'm going out there and attacking my 150 max for tomorrow. Now we'll use some stats and try and go into the weeds a little bit with the shots gained metrics and find you a few more plays. Before we do so, let me see if there's any questions that we have about the weather. If not, we're going to go through these shots gained metrics. What's going on? Anthony says, hit the like button. I couldn't agree more. Go ahead and do so if you guys haven't already. What's going on, Philly? What's going on, Nip? Somebody's not too happy with Sanjay. Yeah, 30% of the field is going down with him so far, but a lot of golf left, that's for sure. What's going on, B-Bald? Sanjay season. Yeah, dude, the thumbnail is pretty funny out here for round 2 showdown. I'll give you that one. What's going on? Kim Jump says, nice comeback for Cole. Yeah, that was clutch out there for our prop slip this week, so that was super clutch. Does Nick Taylor realize anytime soon that he isn't Scotty? So a little bit of a mouthful, but yeah, he's playing like Scotty Scheffler. Last week, JJ Spawn was hitting the ball like Scotty Scheffler. I think it's just early in the year vibes. Like some of these guys have got it going there during the offseason. He's probably going to fall off really soon, though, to answer your question. Hey, Luke, thank you for all you do. Of course, thanks for showing up, Kep. What's going on, TJ? Any edge starting on 1 or 10? That's a really good question, but we'd have to look at all 3 golf courses. And my general rule of thumb when it comes to starting on holes 1 and 10 is that you're using those kind of edges to go out there and break ties, because you're talking about maybe a less than 5% difference when it comes to their chance of actually getting a streak. So like the best case scenario, right, would be if you have a par 5 on hole 10, and then you'd have par 5 on like holes 8 or 9 or something like that. When you have a really easy window for a streak like that, that only has a small effect when it comes to your projection. It's something that I account for on the few golf courses around the tour where you get that kind of effect. But this week, it's not something that I'm including in my process. So I think it's just a little bit too hard to do that when you have 3 different golf courses to go with. But yeah, sometimes I'll play that kind of edge when I'm playing on just a single golf course slate. But what I've noticed at these golf courses is that you don't really have that kind of stretch. Like the par 5 over here on the Nicklaus course is at number 7. On the back 9, it's over there at hole 15. So that's kind of out of play. Go over here to La Quinta. You do have one there at 5 and 6, but you're going to get that whether you're starting a hole 1 or 10, right, at that golf course. And then on the back 9, the same thing. You don't really have those easy holes towards the end. You go over here to the stadium course and you're going to see the same kind of thing. So I just don't see that kind of opportunity this week. And even if there was, what I was trying to say there is like, it's not a big difference. Like you're talking about like a 0.1 point difference when it comes to their projection, which shouldn't really be changing your decision all that much. So I'd usually stay away from doing that kind of thing, but you do you, of course. What's going on? Jay Steele, welcome on in, and let's get after it. So before we go into some of the shots gained metrics out here for tomorrow, the issue with shots gained metrics is that we only have them for a third of the field. So you don't have shot link over there at this. You only have it at the stadium course. You don't have it at Nicklaus or over there at La Quinta. So the issue is we have no idea how JT Posting got to his -10. We have no idea how Justin Lauer shot -9 today. Now we do know how Nick Taylor played. You can see over here, it was a pretty balanced shots gained profile. So coming in off the win, he's absolutely killing it. So not a huge surprise there with Nick Taylor, but all of these guys that we don't see the shots gained metrics for, we're completely in the unknown on. So on a week like this, I would argue that the stone is even more valuable than most weeks. And it's already the best tool that you have out there for researching Showdown, because you're going to have stats on there that give you a leg up over everyone else that doesn't have shots gained metrics on 2/3 of the field. Because over there on the stone, they have round 2 performance. They've got bad round regression over there that you can look at. You can look at a player's approach delta, which is, in my opinion, what I really want to look at over there on the stone the most. That with the round 2 stats, along with some of the bad round regression, are ways that you can find some of your sleeper picks over there on the stone. And just to give you guys an example of a play that absolutely went off, let's find Justin Lauer over here on the sheet, who I know they had on here as a sleeper play for this week. You can see over here, he's highlighted in purple. That's how they designate a sleeper play over there on the stone. And you'll also see that he's a really good round 1 score and a good showdown play over there on DGen's scorecard. So he's the kind of play that if you were looking at the tools over there on the SHIPIT Nation site, that you'd probably use in your round 1 lineups. And what did Justin Lauer do? Oh, that's right. He had back-to-back eagles today. He ended up having a -9, maybe even bogey-free round. I'd have to double check and fact check that. Either way was the absolute nuts when it came to round 1 showdown. You could easily play to Justin Lauer today if you're using a tool like the stone. So of course, guys, use code Luke10 if you're signing up over there. But for this is the main slate stone. So this is not the round 2 stone that you're looking at. So if you thought that you were getting the round 2 stone for free, unfortunately, guys, this is not it, right? We're not going to give it to you for free like that so easily over here on the live stream. But it's a little bit different for Showdown. They have a few more categories posted, which are even more valuable. They've got even more data on there for the Showdown one, which is crazy. There's already a ton of data on here over here for the main slate. But what you're getting over there for Showdown is you're getting an idea of a player's chance to regress to the mean. And rather than giving you all these complicated stats that you're looking at, when you look at a player's true approach delta, you literally just look for the highest number, right? You're trying to find the guys that have the best chance to regress to the mean. And those are the players that have the really high delta number. So that's what you're looking for in players over there on the stone. That combined with the different sleepers, pivots that they're pointing out over there as plays. You can look at the round 2 scores, those bad round regression players, as I was talking before. Just a great tool, especially when we don't have all those shots gained metrics. We are going to use what we can to go out there and find some plays for tomorrow. So even if you don't have a tool like the stone, you can still obviously go out there and do some research, but you're only going to be limited to 33% of the field. So you're really not getting the full picture out there for tomorrow. But if you look at the players that played well on approach over there on the stadium course, you have guys like Carson Young up there towards the top, who, by the way, I do a lot of work with Bet the Number on my channel over there on YouTube. And what I'll say is that they were really high on Carson Young this week. So I used him in a lot of my exposure. He's good in some of the approach ranges that you see around these golf courses. He's a good putter on these greens. So to see him going out there and lighting it up on the greens, he's not playing that super hard stadium course tomorrow. Like maybe he goes out there and can pack up another super low round. So I don't want to say that you have to avoid all the guys that went super low over there on the stadium course. But if they do it well with the approach play, like maybe you want to consider playing these sort of players. So like a Vincent Norman, you can see also went out there, had a good approach day. Jackson Suber continuing the momentum from last week over there at the Sony, going out there and posting over 3 shots gained on approach. Patton Kizzire had a really good fall swing, continues to hit the ball well there with nearly 3 shots gained approach. And Eric Van Rooyen, I know there's one guy in the SHIPIT Nation Discord that seems to love Eric Van Rooyen. So shout out to that guy. 2.5 shots gained approach yesterday or today. And he lost 1.5 strokes putting. So you can see Norman lost a little putting. Maybe he's a little bit better tomorrow. Worth noting, though, that Vincent Norman, for lack of a better word, is a terrible putter. I was going to use stronger language, but we'll keep it PG rated over here on the SHIPIT channel. Jackson Suber, he's a pretty good putter. So maybe he keeps it going. But guys like Patton Kizzire in EVR down here losing 1.5 strokes putting, even if they're a neutral tomorrow, that makes them at least a stroke better than what they were yesterday, let alone if they go out there and gain on these POA overseeded greens. So EVR, he's a little bit inconsistent on the greens. I wouldn't call him, the kind of guy that you're relying on when it comes to that putter, but certainly somebody you could see gain 2-3 strokes putting. And same thing with a Patton Kizzire. Nick Taylor also had a good approach day. Ches Reavie also showing up there. Chris Ventura, a player that I'm personally pretty high on going forward. A Jesper Svensson also posted 1.5 strokes on approach. If we want to look at some of the guys that played well off the tee, we can always do that as well. Right? How you hit the ball off the tee is also a very important stat. Jackson Suber also showing up towards the top of that list. A few guys that I'm keeping an eye on would be at Harris English. He's a streaky driver, but he drove the ball well today. Same thing with a Tom Kim there. Sungjae Im, despite having the horrendous scorecard, lost over 5 strokes in approach. I have no idea what the heck happened with him when it came to his swing today. Luckily, 0% exposure here, so I don't have any sort of casualties in terms of my lineups, but I would not think that he's going to do that again. Right? Like Sungjae Im's a much, much better player on approach than this. And if you're looking at his approach delta on the stone later, I can tell you for a fact that Sungjae Im's, and if that's if they actually have it on there. I just remembered, because it is an event where they only have 3 courses, they only have the data for one of those 3 courses. They're probably not going to have that on the stone. But like if they did, we know Sungjae is a much better approach player than what we saw for today. So he would grade out very well in that kind of a category. So a Sungjae Im, if you're looking for some regression, could definitely be in play. The issue would be that he looked a little bit broken out there, but it's golf. It's a crazy sport. You sometimes just have a really bad day. Lucas Glover hit the ball really well off the tee, but lost strokes on approach, which is also the kind of thing that you'd expect to turn around. Just like a Sungjae Im, his true approach delta would be well into the positive because he normally gains a bunch of strokes putting, and today he lost strokes like you see right there. So if anything tomorrow, you would expect him to improve on that sort of performance. A few other guys that were striping it off the tee: Carson Young, Luke List, Vincent Norman showing up once again. And if we combine that into shots gained ball striking, which is just looking at approach and off the tee at the same time, you have Jackson Suber towards the top. He was showing up across both lists. Same thing with Carson Young, Vincent Norman, also EVR, guys that were in the top 10 of both categories. These sort of players, particularly like an EVR, I would say stat-wise, EVR might be the one that looks the best on paper going into round number 2. And he's only -1, so he's not going to be particularly chalky out there in Showdown either. Is probably my favorite play over there for in terms of the guys that were popping with the Showdown stats. If we go to the putting stats, we kind of want to look for poppers for the opposite reason. So while we're looking for approach guys to continue that into tomorrow, your golf swing is a lot more repeatable than what you have on the greens. A player's putting stroke is extremely variant from day to day, and a lot of putting comes down to luck more than it comes down to skill. So you have guys like Todd Taylor up here towards the top end of the list, but if they didn't gain a bunch of strokes on approach, so like Taylor did, right? Like, so I could see him continuing his dominance after the win last week. Like he might go out there and go back to back at this point with how he's playing. But some of these other guys here, like Brendan Todd, who lost nearly 5 strokes on approach, like he's in a really bad spot when it comes to his stats for tomorrow, especially because he putted way above his baseline. Somebody like a Jacob Bridgman who lost strokes on approach, who, by the way, I played in lineups this week, so I hope he turns it around. But stat-wise, he doesn't really set up well out there for round 2 showdown. If he continues to hit the ball like he did for round 1, and then he happens to not be as lucky on the greens, like you could see where he goes from -2 to something closer to even par. A few other guys that putted above their baseline, maybe most notably the biggest red flag out of all of these would be a Luke List. He's one of the worst putters that we have on the PGA Tour, and he went out there and gained a bunch of strokes putting. Cam Davis can be a little bit of a loose cannon, so he's the kind of guy who will gain 2-3 strokes putting one day and then lose 2-3 strokes the next. So he's somebody I'd also raise maybe like the orange flag on, maybe not sure the red flag like a Luke List, but definitely something I'm eyeing given the side eye. Nick Hardy, not the best putter. A Carson Young, also a little bit sketchy there too. He gained just over a stroke over there on the greens, whereas Sungjae Im, I don't worry about it. Sungjae is a good putter. A Matt McCarty is one of the better putters that we have in this field. Elanto Griffin's a decent putter. Even a Jesper Svensson that we saw gaining over 2 strokes putting up here are guys that I could easily see it, continuing for going into round 2. So part of it is just knowing who the good putters are. Those sort of guys, sometimes they'll get hot for 2-3 rounds. But just like you saw over there for the Century, you also saw it for the Sony Open. The guys that were first round leaders that oftentimes gain like 4 or 5 strokes putting, they usually end the week with less shots gained putting than what they had out there for round number 1. So I would expect a lot of these players towards the top to come back to the mean a little bit. And that's why you might want to consider a fade for those kind of players over there on Showdown. On the opposite end of the spectrum, it's sometimes nice to look at the guys who couldn't buy a putt for their life, especially if they were going out there and hitting the ball well. So we already talked about EVR. You can see him gaining on approach, yet losing about 1.5 over there with the putter. But somebody that is a little bit sneakier, I would say, might be a Tom Kim, who gained nearly 0.6 strokes on approach, but lost about 3 strokes on the greens. A Davis Riley was dog shit across both categories. So yeah, you probably don't want to play him. But a Kazire, I know that we used him as an example before. A Chris Ventura lost about a stroke putting too. Ventura is also one of the better putters that we have in this field. So you might expect him to turn it around sooner rather than later. A Chan Kim was able to go out there and gain on approach. He is a little bit inconsistent on the greens, but maybe he's a little bit better over there for round 2 showdown. These are the kind of stats that I'm looking for in my kind of process. So hopefully it gives you guys an idea of the kind of stats that you can look at. I think the Stone's an even easier way to go about your research process just because they do a lot of that work for you. If you're looking for guys that are going to regress with their irons, their putter, all that sort of stuff, they give you one category to look at, right? And again, the higher the number, the more positive the number that you have on those Delta categories, the better they are out there for the next day of Showdown. So that's what I'd be looking at. The Stone, if you guys haven't already signed up over there. Once again, code Luke10 if you guys haven't already to sign up. Give you that discount off any membership. But let's go ahead and talk some lineup construction and what you should be thinking about when you're going out there and building lineups. Before we do so, I'll see if there's any questions that we need to catch up on. And then if not, we're going to build a lineup, give you guys that insight, and then hop on out of here. So where we at? He didn't play great today, but what do I think about Joe Highsmith? So he's a high birdie percentage player, and I've got him at sub 2% ownership for Showdown tomorrow. So he's on the easier golf course now. He's able to move on from the stadium course. And kind of like a Sungjae Im, you're going to have some guys that just sucked over there at the stadium course. It's a firm and fast golf course because of the renovation. There was no wind or anything like that. But if you're not dialed in, you're going to shoot well over par. So guys like Highsmith, Sungjae, I'm willing to give a little bit of leeway to, a little bit of a leash at this kind of event, just because I knew they were playing a tough golf course. So yeah, I don't think he's the safest play by any means, Kep, but if you need leverage, if you're in a large field GPP and you've got to find a way to offset some chalk, Joe Highsmith is the kind of guy I'm playing. Now, if I already have a bunch of differentiation in my lineup, I don't need to get different with one of my guys down low. I'm not sure if I'm using a Joe Highsmith personally, right? He is a little bit risky. Like if I already have that at another spot, I'm going to use somebody else personally, but there's a time and place for it, right? What's going on? Angelina says, good afternoon. Welcome on in. What's going on? Sites. Hope posting could hold on for your outright. That'd be pretty sweet. He had a high number this week. I think it was like 50, 60 to 1. So whatever you got, best of luck out there this weekend. Jay Steele says, which Delta were you talking about? Approach or putting? Approach Delta is where you want the positive, right? Guys that are going to have a better day on approach tomorrow. It's the same thing with the putting. All those deltas, you want well into the positive, especially the approach one. Super first off the tee, third on approach, and seventh putting. Wild stats. You have to think he's going to come down to earth, right? He's not going to be that good across the board, but he's making a case for early rookie of the year candidate. What's going on, Anthony? What courses are playing easiest, hardest? So if you want my full take on that, I'll have you go back to about the 3-minute mark. I do a full breakdown in all 3 golf courses, but the simple answer, without giving you all like the nitty gritty right here, you can go back and obviously check that out, was Nicklaus course the easiest, and then La Quinta, and then the hardest by far, it was like nearly 4 strokes harder, was the stadium course over here at 0.23 over par. So that's the answer. Let me know if you have any questions, though, when it comes to those. And what do we think about Tony Finau? So he looked decent, shot -3. He really rallied towards the end of his day, had 4 birdie putts lip out today. So obviously could have gone a whole lot lower. I think he's a good showdown play. He's let me take a look at where I've got him for ownership. I know he's not on the stadium course, so we're not going to have to worry about that. I've got him at one of the lower owned guys in the 9K range. In fact, I've got him well lower than guys like Razorman. I've got him lower owned than Cantlay by a pretty good margin. And I've actually got him even lower owned than Sungjae Im, which is kind of wild when you think about it. But because Sungjae Im is playing at La Quinta, and he's like the only guy up top that's playing at La Quinta. And by the way, these are my projections that I'm referring to when I'm talking about this. So these are not the SHIPIT Nation ones. So don't take it as what you're going to see on SHIPIT Nation later. These are the ones that I'm doing for myself, my Patreon members. But Sungjae Im, I've got it like 23% ownership because you have a lot of people that just think La Quinta is easier, which first off was wrong from round number 1, but you've heard it so many times at this golf course in the past that people that aren't doing their due diligence and research are going to try and stack guys at La Quinta. And if I'm looking at my sheet right now, of the guys that are 9K plus, Sungjae Im is the only player that you can take from La Quinta. So I've got him getting more steam than you would probably think for Showdown, just because he's the only guy that you can play from that golf course. So keep in mind that Showdown ownership, all that sort of stuff for this slate tomorrow is going to be kind of wacky. Main thing to notice, and I meant to mention this earlier, guys, this is a good time to mention it, though, now that we're going through lineup construction. The Showdown ownership from round number 1 was interesting to say the least. It was about 390% that you had over there from La Quinta. It was about 150% that you had from the Nicklaus course. And it was about 50%, I believe, 50-60%, something around there, that you had people playing from the stadium course. So 60% of the field, which is just less than one of the 6 spots that people are using in lineups, were dead from the start, right? And it's not 60% of lineups, because you have to think, right, if you were stacking lineups, a lot of the slappies that played guys from the stadium probably even used a few together. So it's probably closer to like 40% of lineups that were dead using guys on the stadium course. But on average, 4 of the slots over there in Showdown lineups were using guys from La Quinta, and just under 1.5 were using guys from the Nicklaus course. Now, people aren't dumb. People know how to do research now, right? There's been enough Showdown shows around for the last 5-6 years. 5-6 of them, people have been really drilled to this point on what to do over there for Showdown, where they're going to look at the stats over here on Data Golf. You're going to see that the Nicklaus course is slightly easier. And I would think that those averages are going to come down to earth a little bit, that it's not going to be 400% over there on La Quinta. It might be closer to like 250% next time around. Maybe it's 300% rather than 390%. A lot of that is going to go to the Nicklaus course. You're still going to have a lot of slappies that go out there and play guys from the stadium course. But the thing to note, but with your lineup construction, what you're going to see with my ownership projections on my slate is that the Nicklaus guys are going to be a little bit lower owned, because I think you have enough people out there not doing their due diligence, not doing their research, that are just going to go out there and stack La Quinta. Because when you take a look at the stats from today, which is something that I did with a deep dive, 4 out of the 6 spots on average were guys used from La Quinta. And that's a very significant average, right? That's not just because it was Tony Finau, Cantlay, a lot of your decent players towards the top that were over there on La Quinta. It was a much bigger difference than that kind of noise. So when you're going out there and building lineups, one thing to note when it comes to the ownership, when you're trying to avoid some of that chalk, is that taking Nicklaus guys, especially in the mid to lower tier range, could be a way to get some slightly lower owned players. So what I'm going to do here with this lineup is we're going to try and find some Nicklaus course guys to go out there and stack around, because I'm even going to have lineups where I just take 6 guys from the Nicklaus course, because as I mentioned earlier, if you're here for the course breakdown, I thought the Nicklaus course had the worst field with the worst pod as I was referring to them before, out of the three that we had there. And it played the easiest out of the three. So if we're going to take some Nicklaus Course guys, I'm going to throw Tony Finau into this lineup. I've got him as one of the lower owned guys towards the top, a little bit under 20% ownership right now. I haven't finalized my ownership quite yet, but he'll probably be around 20% when it's all said and done. Our second man in, I'm going to find somebody in the 9K range. I'm going to throw an Eric Cole into this kind of lineup. Tony Finau had a lot of positive momentum towards the end. He had an eagle, a few birdies towards his last 4 or 5 holes. And then Eric Cole, his last 17 holes today, shot -7. So I like those two guys over there on the Nicklaus Course. They're also going to be guys that, you know, I don't want to call them low owned, but compared to the guys around them, they're a little bit lower owned in a few cases. For the 8K guy, let's go to Patrick Fishburne, who I know he didn't have a very good day, right? That's why the ownership's lower. He only shot even par when it came to round number 1, but he's going to give us a bunch of leverage there at $8,100. So let's throw him in there. I'm going to take a guy here towards the top end of the 7K range as well. So that's going to be an Adam Hadwin that we end up playing here. Another guy playing on the Nicklaus Course. That's the case with all 4 of these so far. And then we're also going to throw in one more guy here towards the top end of the 7K range. So that could be a Jason Day. I think I'm going to avoid him, though, after he went super low. And we're going to throw in a Ricky Fowler, who, yeah, Ricky, also a guy who didn't have his best stuff. But this kind of lineup right here, we've got Pivot and Fishburne for sure. We've got Pivot for sure over here in Ricky Fowler. Tony Finau and Eric Cole and Adam Hadwin, I wouldn't call either one of those three a true pivot because they're all at least like 10, 15% owned, but they're about average ownership at the very most compared to the guys around them. So we've got 3 guys that I would say are like lukewarm ownership, right? You don't feel good or bad about playing those 3. You got 2 pivots mixed in. So even if our last man in here, we wanted to go a little bit chalky in the large field GPP, you'd be totally fine with ownership. We already have all the pivots, all the differentiation that we're looking for. So even if you wanted to play a pretty popular Chris Kirk, who's on the Nicklaus Course over here for tomorrow, maybe you wanted to go to a popular Nick Taylor, who he's not on the Nicklaus Course, but he is like 16.5% owned over there in my round 2 showdown projections. You could get away with it if you wanted to. Now, that doesn't mean you have to play chalk here. I mean, personally, I'd probably rather use like a Keith Mitchell as my last man in, who, by the way, Keith Mitchell is playing on the Nicklaus Course tomorrow. He's a little bit lower owned than some of those other guys that we talked about. I've gotten closer to like 7.5% ownership, but you could use whoever you wanted to here and realistically get away with it over there with your showdown lineups. We don't have any like 50,000 entry contest over here for round 2 showdown. They're a lot smaller this time of year before we end up getting to major season. So while we need differentiation, we need to make sure we're not duplicating ourselves with a bunch of other people. Another way to force in some differentiation, by the way, would be to leave some salary on the table. So if you like really wanted to be sure that you weren't duplicating yourself, maybe add in a little bit of extra leverage. Perhaps you go a little bit further down the board, but you don't necessarily have to, is what I'm saying here. Like, we already have enough leverage out there with this first 5 players. But if you rounded off this kind of lineup with a Billy Horschel at $7,400, who, by the way, is also a Nicklaus Course player, then you're for sure going to be good out there in the large field GPP. So large field GPPs, we really just want to make sure we're not duplicating ourselves to protect our long-term ROI. And we also want to make sure that when our players hit, they go out there and shoot something like -6, -7, that we're actually moving up those leaderboards. So that's the idea out there in those kind of contests. If you're playing into single entry, something a little bit smaller, something like 520 max that only has like 1,000 entries, then you could be a little bit less worried about the ownership. If there's somebody that's a little bit chalkier that you want to play, then hey, go out there and use them in your lineups. And just to give you guys some of the chalk out there for tomorrow, I've got Sam Burns at about 30% ownership. I've got Max Fraserman from the Nicklaus Course at about 25% ownership. Justin Thomas also over 26% owned when it comes to showdown there in round number 2. Those kind of players you can use in lineups as long as you're thinking about the ownership with your last 3-4 spots. So not every lineup I'm going to have is going to start with a Tony Finau by anything. In fact, he'll probably be one of my he'll probably be like my 3rd or 4th highest owned guy up there from 8K plus. But I'm going to have some chalk up here that I'm playing that I'm offsetting with some guys down there in that 6 and 7K range. So that's really what I'm thinking about when it comes to that lineup construction. You know, you don't have to galaxy brain it, right? Just have 2-3 pivots in your lineup. If you have some giga chalk, maybe you added an extra pivot to offset it. And that's really all you got to do out there in your lineups. But Finau's not 100%. We could never play him. Yeah, I saw that tweet as well. Hey, yeah, let all the slappies stay off of Tony Finau. I'm totally fine with it. Is him done for? Probably. But there are 2 rounds left. So he could go out there and make the cut. And if he ends up making the cut, I mean, he's got 36 holes to work with, right? So he's got a good amount of leeway. He's going to be totally fine. So he's behind the 8 ball. Let's put it that way, right? He's got to go out there and shoot minus 12, minus 14 over the next 2 days, but it's at least within the range of outcomes. And then is Thorpe viable? I always loved Thorpe. I played him this week. Let's look at the shots gained metrics, though. I'm not sure if we have them. Not sure what course he played. So yeah, no shots gained metrics because he played on one of the courses without him, but he had 8 birdies or better today. So I would say that in general, he's a high birdie player. Let me double check what golf course he's playing before I give you the full go ahead. He's on the Nicklaus course. So he's playing, in my opinion, the easiest out of the 3 golf courses. Yeah, I think he's a decent play out there for tomorrow. That's all I've got over there for the round 2 live stream, though, guys. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. For the betting and prop preview, that'll be over there on my channel a little bit later on tonight. So make sure to check that out if you guys want to get a full breakdown of underdog and prize picks for tomorrow. We'll go through some free ball bets, also some matchups over there as well on sites like FanDuel, Caesars, Hard Rock Bet, all of that kind of stuff. So here we talk showdown, give you guys the DFS side of things. If you're a golf better, like to take a look at all of that kind of stuff. That's what the GS Luke channel is for. So obviously GS Luke DFS is how you can find that. GS Luke DFS over there on Twitter/X as well. Is it something that you guys want to follow as well to get all the updates on when I'm going live? That's all I've got over there for the live stream. Make sure to check out SHIPIT Nation if you guys haven't already. Sign up using code Luke10. It'll give you a discount off those memberships. Let's go ahead and ship it over there for round number 2.